Welcome back to the channel, everybody. So guys, today we're going to talk about the two big issues that I see when it comes to people actually gearing their champions. So the first one is going to be this build right here, okay? Now this is not actually my Rio build. This is just some destruction that happened and I never fixed it. But either way, this would be the under gearing side of things. Obviously, this champion could not be expected to do anything worthwhile because she's missing 3 pieces of gear, okay? Terrible, obviously, but sometimes players will gear their champions with different stat boots, so like attack percentage, HP percentage, defense percentage, when they don't actually have enough speed for that to make sense. Now that's a very beginner problem. However, one time, let me get into a quick story time real quick, okay? Very short story, but I went into somebody's account and they had no weapon, helmet, or shield. I asked them why. That is a pretty significant part of their account. It makes gearing your champions very, very hard when you have 0 weapon, helmets, or shield. And they said that they were told to sell all flat stat, main stat pieces. So they sold all the weapons, helmets, and shield, which if you didn't know, weapons, helmets, and shield can only have flat main stats. So weapons, attack, helmets, HP, and shields, defense. So this player had a pretty big issue. So like I said, that is beginner issues. That unique issue is, I don't even know what kind of issue, but besides that, when you get later into the game, it stops becoming an issue of under gearing your champions and more so an issue of over gearing your champions. So let's talk about what stats can you over gear. So you can kind of over gear defense in some situations. The top stats, the HP, attack, and defense, you could technically over gear those in some situations, but majority of the time, it's not going to be a very capped out amount. Speed, you could over gear, but it really just depends on what area of the game you're doing. Speed boosters, you're never going to overgear those champions. But the main stats that you can overgear, obviously, is going to be crit rate. We're not going to be talking about that one in today's video. The main ones are going to be resistance, accuracy, and crit damage, surprisingly. So crit damage specifically comes into play when you're using those max HP damage dealers. So Septimus, Husk, Royal Guard, Cold Hearts, all those champions that you're using in dungeons, and Hydra, Iron Twin, things like that, they can cap out their damage very, very easily. Cold Brew did a video on this about a year ago, I think, and he had a sheet very similar to this. I took that sheet, copied it over, made a few changes, added a few things. We're going to go over that all in a minute. I'm going to show you guys how it actually works, but as far as the bosses go, stage 21 plus, they all have this passive ability. And as time goes on, more and more bosses in the game are getting this passive. So you have Hydra, which has passives exactly like this. You have the Iron Twins, same thing. Clan Boss has had something very similar for a long time, but we're not going to talk about Clan Boss in this video. But damage from skills that scale based on enemies' max HP cannot exceed 10% of the boss's max HP when attacking the boss. So if you're doing Dragon, Fire Knight, Spider, Ice Golem, whatever you're doing, stage 21 and above, there's a point where you don't need any more crit damage on your damage dealing champions. So today's example, I'm going to use stage 25 of Spider and use my Cold Hearts that speed run stage 25. I don't do stage 25 very often, but we'll talk about it here. And then hopefully you guys can use this sheet for your own champions. You only have to use it a few times. Once you get your champions builds down, you're going to be good to go. You don't have to worry about it anymore. So Spider stage 25. Let's go into the champions. I'll do one run, and then we'll check the champion stats and everything. This should be a pretty fast run, assuming all my champions are geared correctly. Watch the Cold Hearts hit. They should all be pretty close to the same amount of damage. And then we'll talk about the importance, okay? So first Cold Heart, 773, 773, and 773. So 770, I don't know. It's a big number, okay? 773 is a number we're gonna go off of. They're all hitting for that number. So we're gonna talk about how you can make sure your max HP hitters are doing the most all the time, because there's actually a pretty big variance in the damage, even if a champion's geared the exact same way. We'll talk about that in just a few seconds, so 29 seconds. Now, let's go ahead and go over to this sheet, and I'll talk about how you can actually use this. Let me hide myself, because this sheet is pretty compact and filled as it is. We're gonna do 125, actually, may have to just do 100. Actually, we'll leave it 125 so you guys can see pretty well. So over here on the right side, I've changed the sheet a decent amount. What we have here is the area. So I've added Hydra to this. What you can select is Hydra or Dungeons. If, for example, you want to do Dungeons, select Dungeons, select which dungeon you want to do. So since we're using Spider as the example, we're going to do Spider, stage 25. So once you do this, it's going to add the HP and defense of Spider stage 25, and it's going to fill those numbers in over here. So you have the HP of Spider Stage 25 right here, filled in over here. So if we're calculating based on Cold Heart, we go up here to Cold Heart, select Cold Heart Champion, and what this is doing. So Ash Voyager is the one who created this sheet. Ash Voyager has a whole entire breakdown of all the champions and their multipliers down below. Now, this isn't going to be updated with all the newest champions. So like Acrizia and champions who are going to be released soon aren't going to be in this list, but this gives you a very, very good idea for those OG type champions. I'm not for sure how recently updated this was at the time of making a copy, but here's what we have, okay? So we're going to go with Cold Heart. So my Cold Heart, for example, we'll just select any of them. We'll see what she's doing and what she's capable of. I'm not going to use any one with a blessing because the blessing could skew the results a little bit. So we'll use Cold Heart number 3 right here. So my Cold Heart number 3 is rocking an Instinct set, which I'm actually a pretty big fan of. The Instinct set ignores 15% of the enemy's defense. But first thing, let's plug in these stats. They don't really matter as far as the HP, but we'll plug it in for now because her damage isn't based on HP. We'll just do 37,000. For the attack stat, we have 3608. So 3608. For defense, doesn't matter, but we'll enter it just for the purpose of this video, 2138. For crit damage, this is very important, 244% crit damage. We don't need anything above 70% crit rate for Cold Heart because we only care about her A3 hitting that critical hit. So that doesn't matter. So we have over here 244% crit damage. And as far as the champions ignore defense percentage, as you recall, we have 15% ignore defense from her Instinct set. If you had Savage plus Cruel, that would be, let's go over and check it real quick. It's going to be 30%, but you have Savage ignoring 25%, and then you add on the Cruel set, which is going to be 30%, which an additional 5% to that 25%, which is going to give you 30% total. So for my case, it's going to be Cold Heart with just an Instinct set. So she's going to ignore 15% of the enemy's defense from the gear sets. Now, as far as the attack buffs, I've changed a few of these drop-down menus here, make it pretty simple. So we have no attack buff, no defense buff, no crit damage buff. And then down here in the Masteries section, let's go back over to the Cold Heart. So my Masteries, I have Heart of Glory, which is going to increase my damage inflicted by 5% when attacking with full HP. So this will be an extra 5% that I do need to account for. We have Bring It Down, which is going to increase my damage by 6%. So we have a total of 11% increase from there. Let me go ahead and put 11% right here. Now, technically, this ability would increase my damage, but since I mostly care about the damage being dealt to the spider above 40% HP, I'm not going to add this extra 8%, and you guys can do the same. Nothing down here is going to change anything unless my Cold Heart actually killed something, but in this case, it's not going to matter. If you had Ruthless Ambush, you could definitely add that, an extra 8%. If you had Helm Smasher, you would fill that in this section right here. Have Helm Smasher? In my case, it's going to be 0 because I do not have Helm Smasher on this Cold Heart. I've opted for Flawless Execution because it's a lot more consistent. So we have 11% on the total damage boosted. And then down here in this section, this is all the stuff that's previously applied from the right side of the screen over here. So we don't have to change none of that. But these drop-down menus right here is Weaken applied. We have no Weaken and we have no decreased defense, I don't think. So that team we're running is Cold Heart, Kymar, Grawl, and that's all. So no decreased defense. So let's go down here and check, is my Cold Heart gonna do enough damage to reach not only the max HP damage threshold, but more specifically this one right here. So this one right here is the most important part, okay? This is gonna be the booked A3 minimum damage. You can see there's a pretty big range from the minimum damage over here to the maximum damage. My Cold Heart could hit up to 976,000 damage, which is crazy. But I don't want to face the RNG all the time of maybe getting that max hit or maybe not. So instead of looking at these numbers over here, which are the maxed booked and unbooked potential, I'm going to be looking at the minimum booked and unbooked potential. So for my case, my Cold Heart's A3 ability is fully maxed, so it's fully booked out and everything. So the minimum amount of damage that my Cold Heart's A3 ability is going to do is 798,000 damage. The max HP damage that I could possibly do against the spider boss on stage 25 is 773,000 damage, which is exactly what she was hitting. That 773 number that I was confused about, that's the number right there. So if you don't want to get into the weeds about those numbers down there, I've actually added this thing up here, which basically says, hey, this number on the bottom left, which is the booked, whichever one in the category. So for like Royal Guard, for example, it's going to be in the A2. It's going to check whichever the highest number is. If that number is greater than this number right here, then it's going to say, yes, you will reach the max. So for example, if I change this to Royal Guard, it's going to do the exact same thing. He does not reach the max with this build level yet, unfortunately. And this ability, his A2, he's actually doing 738,000. But if I boosted his crit damage up to 250, let's see, we're still not quite there. We need a little bit more. Let's do 275. And then boom, this 804,000 number does exceed this 773,000 number. So yes, my Royal Guard with 275% crit damage with 15% ignore defense will reach the max HP damage cap on Spider stage 25. So guys, that was a lot of information. Hopefully that breakdown was pretty clear. But what I've added in addition to the dungeon stuff was some Hydra stuff as well. So if you want to do the Hydra calculations instead, obviously you're going to need the Hydra defense and HP numbers, which are going to be this little tiny one right there. So to switch that, instead of taking these ones over here, instead of taking this column, which I can't actually highlight it, instead of taking this column right here, you're actually going to start taking this column over here. So we hit dungeons, go to Hydra, and then instead of brutal, let's do, say, hard, for example. And then it's going to add the hard Head of Wrath. The reason why I've done Head of Wrath specifically is because if you look at the Hydra stats, the Head of Wrath is actually the closest to the median number. Okay, so median, this is what I did. I did median, and then I highlighted all these HPs, and then I made this little number right here, 885,000. And it just so happened that Head of Wrath was pretty close to that number. Wasn't the highest, wasn't the lowest. It gave me a pretty good idea with the HP and defense. So that is the number we're going off of, is based off of the Head of Wrath. The heads like Head of Suffering, Head of Decay, they're quite a bit higher. So you're not going to necessarily reach the max HP threshold on those, but all the ones at or below the Head of Wrath, you will reach, assuming this area up here is checked green. So for this case, we had the same Royal Guard. We drop him down to 200% crit damage. And then I guess he's still reaching that max cap. Hydra max HP cap. Okay, yeah. So Hydra is going to be pretty easy to reach, at least the Head of Wrath. But if we dropped him down to, say, 150, he's not going to reach it anymore. That is on hard. Now, if we did Nightmare, we had 250% crit damage. Not going to reach it. But if we add increased defense or decreased defense on the enemy, then we will begin to reach that number. So this is going to allow you to gear your damage dealers to actually hit the correct damage thresholds and not be throwing a ton of gear on, say, Cold Heart or Royal Guard or Husk that you don't actually need. Now, for Royal Guard and Husk, and even Cold Heart, this is actually very, very important because all three of those champions that I just gave an example of are going to need accuracy if you want their debuffs to land. So when it comes to Hydra, I mentioned before that accuracy and resistance are the two other stats that you could technically over gear on. Like if you have a ton of accuracy and you're going in Hydra, you don't really need 800 accuracy, for example. If you want to know how much accuracy you actually need, you just come over here to this very bottom. This is going to be, I'm going to have to hide myself again. This is going to be the Hydra stats. This was all data mined by Bobo. So this over here, I've added these two sections, or actually I added these three sections. So this right here is going to say how much accuracy and resistance you're going to need to either place your debuffs or resist the Hydra head's debuffs. So for resistance, the highest amount of resistance you're going to need on normal Hydra is going to be 355. That's specifically for the Head of Mischief, but it'll resist everything. And then for accuracy, the highest amount of accuracy you're going to need for normal is going to be 165 accuracy. So blue is for accuracy, and then the red is for the resistance, okay? So if you're doing Nightmare, you're going to need 455 resistance on your Mischief tank, and you're going to need at most 360 accuracy, assuming you're going to want to apply your debuffs on all the different heads of Hydra. So this is going to show you all the Hydra information you need to know, and then over here is going to show you the accuracy and resistance numbers you need for the different dungeon stages. So you have 20 to 25 down here. 19 through 25 all need the same amount of accuracy and resistance. But if you use this sheet, you can start building your champions much, much more efficiently. The reason why this is so important is because if you've hit those stats already on your Cold Heart, if you hit those stats easily on your Royal Guard and Husk, then now you can begin to build more speed. You could maybe even mix up the sets. Maybe you have plenty of gear. You're bringing decreased defense and weaken. So now, instead of needing a crazy amount of damage, let's go ahead and check that out, okay? Say you're using Royal Guard, okay? You have no defense ignore, but you have weaken as well as decreased defense for Hydra. Okay, so we're doing Hydra. We're gonna do brutal. Maybe we want to use a reflex set or a relentless set. So let's see if 220 crit damage is gonna be plenty. Well, according to this, yes. To do the max HP damage on the Head of Wrath, 220% crit damage if you have weakened and decreased defense applied will be enough crit damage to do the max amount on the Head of Wrath. Let's take away the weaken, put it to 0, and we're still good. So more specifically, our booked A2 ability is going to be doing 333,000 damage at the minimum, and the most we could do is 273,441 damage. So maybe we can jump in there and test that out real quick. We're actually coming up to 16 minutes of this video, which is going to be pretty long, but let's go ahead and try this. I think my Husk will actually go ahead and test this out real quick on my Hydra team, just to let you guys know this does work as intended. So Hydra was something I just now added to this whole breakdown, so it may not be 100% correct as it is, but it should give you a very, very good idea. We do have decreased defense from Ugo now. So let me go ahead and add the decreased defense is applied at 60%. So we should hit between 277 and 339, which should allow us to hit that 273 damage cap. Let's go ahead and see if that's true. I tested it out earlier and it looked like it was good, but who knows, maybe it's changed. Maybe I'm just not gonna be lucky in this video, but it should, according to the calculations, it should be perfectly fine. So we'll go ahead and get through Geo's turn. One of my Husks are much lower crit damage. So the first one hits for 273, 442, which is that cap. Technically, it's one higher than the cap. And this one hits for 273, 442. So there we go, guys. That is the breakdown. Both of these Husks are different gear, relentless sets, no defense ignore. One's at 207 crit damage, and the other is at 247. So 207 crit damage is actually pretty low, but he hit the max. So that's perfectly fine. Let's see what this says. Boom. So he's going to hit between the range. So at the lowest point, he's not going to hit the cap, but at the higher end, so between this median and the highest range, he will hit above the cap. So there, we got some good luck, and it happened so that we did hit above the 273,000 mark, giving us the max amount of HP damage we could do. So guys, there we go. 20 minutes diving into an Excel sheet. Hopefully this is my last Excel sheet video for a little while, but thank you all, and I'll catch you all in the next one.